Indo-European language family includes the Afghans, Iranians, Tajiks, Kurds, Baluchis, and Pathans, and is a subfamily within the Indo-European or Aryan language superfamily. That over there is a statue of Zarathushtra, the forefather of Aryan folklore. The ancient Greco-Romans believed Zarathushtra to have been even more ancient than the ancient Egyptians, having placed him 6,000 years before Christ.
Zarathustra lived in the highlands of Aryan, the homeland of the Aryans, on part where the Irano-Afghans live today, between the Himalayan and the Caucasus Mountains. It was in Ariana that Zarathustra first conceived of a single, almighty, all-powerful, and sometimes anthropomorphic creator of the universe that fathered the human race, or God. Zarathustra and his followers were also responsible for introducing to the world expressions like angel, the devil, demon, the incarnate word, the Christ, the Holy Spirit, heaven, hell, the resurrection, and judgment day.
The remains of the ancient Atash-Gaz or Zarathustrian fire churches can be found throughout the Irano-Afghan or Aryan zone. These places of worship are among the holiest sites in the Aryan zone. The god of the Aryans is known as Ahura Mazda, or Ormazd, and is represented by the luminaries, including fire. The Orthodox Zarathustrians are known as either Zarathushtis or Parsis. The word magic is derived from the word magi. The Magi were a priestly caste of Zarathustrians. The Berezman branch was their conduit to the spiritual world. This Aryan symbol became prominent in later folklore and today's pop culture, where it is known as the magic wand. Cyrus the Great was a Zarathustrian. Cyrus was known for having established Persia, the first world empire, and having authorized the Cyrus Cylinder, the first charter on international human rights, which promoted religious tolerance. Cyrus was also responsible for having liberated the Jews from their Babylonian captivity under the Assyrians, and for having funded the reconstruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, which the Assyrians had destroyed. In 300 BC, Alexander the Great led his Greek army east to Persia because at that time the Persian Empire was considered to be a highly enlightened civilization. To the ancient Greeks, Persia was the known world. Alexander seized the Persian Empire and married an Aryan named Roxana who bore him a son. However, not only was Alexander's empire very short-lived, having lasted only 4 years, but it never reached the capacity of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire had been around 300 years before Alexander, and was proportionately the largest empire ever in terms of geography, population, and cultural diversity, when taking into consideration that the world was a much smaller place during those days. The Persian Empire even included parts of Greece like Thrace, Macedonia, and the Ionian states. After Alexander's death, his empire was split between his successors into 4 sections. The largest section went to Seleucus Nicator, who also married an Aryan. Her name was Apama, and she gave birth to Antiochus Soter. The Seleucids ruled the Greco-Persian Empire until the rise of the Parthians. Zarathustrians by religion, the Parthians rose to become the Roman Empire's greatest rivals, though the Aryans on the whole were also tied to the Romans through their religious heritage. By the time the Parthians came on the scene, the religion known as Mithraism, which centered around Mithras, the personified sun, had become the religion of the Roman military, and the name Mithras is derived from the name of the Zarathustrian solar deity Mithra. Hence, the Romans were cultic Persians. Christianity was also heavily influenced by the Aryan religious heritage. As a matter of fact, Christianity has more in common with the Zarathustrian religion than it does with Judaism. Even the God of the Christians and the Aryans is more alike than the God of the Jews. The God of both the Christians and the Aryans is described as a benevolent or all-good God. The God of the Jews, on the other hand, is described as a god that is directly responsible for both good and evil in the world. The wise men who came from afar to present the newborn Jesus Christ with gifts were magi. The magi were a priestly caste of Zarathustrians. The Aramaic Bible tells how it was Zarathustra who instructed the magi to seek Jesus out in an ancient prophecy. And according to Acts 3 of the New Testament, the Aryans or the Medes and Parthians were present during Christ's ascent on the day of the Pentecost. The Aryans were the original knights in shining armor. According to Persian historian Dr. Kaveh Farooq, by the time of Emperor Justinian, the Byzantine and Sasanian Persian cavalry forces were almost identical in appearance. It is now acknowledged that the Romans began to actually copy northern Iranian heavy cavalry. Aryan noted that by Hadrian's time there were Roman cavalrymen who carried the contis, spear or lance, and attack in the manner of the Alans and Sarmatians. The Sasanian and Sarmatian influences on the Romans, Germans, and Slavs have led a number of European scholars to acknowledge that Iranian-style duels seen among Europeans owe much to an Iranian cultural milieu, and that European chivalry in the Middle Ages was descended from that evolved by the Parthians and Sasanians. About a century after the birth of Islam, a Protestant form of Zoroastrianism, abrasive of the Abrahamic faiths called Sufism, arose. Three sects worth noting was the Ashrakian order, or the Illuminati, the Hashishin, or assassins, and the Dervish, or druids. The Hashishin were known for having incorporated the use of the psychedelic substance hashish, a byproduct of hemp, into their rites. The Hashishin called the substance the flesh of Khadir. This practice is almost identical to the ancient Zarathustrian custom of personifying the sacred hom plant, which they incorporated into their own rites and used as libation before heading into battle. Hence the designation Hashishin, as well as our word assassin. The Dervish are also known as the whirling dervishes, named so because of the transcendental dance in which these disciples spin around in circles, mimicking the path of the stars. It was during the Crusades that the warrior priests known as the Knights Templars came into contact with the Aryans. One of the Aryans who the Knights Templars came into contact with in particular was a Kurd known as Saladin. Zoroastrianism, the authentic religious heritage of the Aryans, was the first of a long line of monotheistic religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Thus, the Aryans, including Saladin, took on titles for themselves, like Amir al-Mu'minin, Defender of the Faith. The Crusaders were ultimately repelled by Saladin's forces, but not all was lost. The Knights Templars returned to their native lands, bringing with them the knowledge of the East, knowledge which resulted in the concept of individualism and the Arthurian lore. The concept of passionate or romantic love is rooted in the Zarathustrian concept of the good principle. Romantic love differed from previous notions of love, or conjugal love, in that it emphasized the individual. It is also known that members of the Knights Templars played a hand in the drafting of the Magna Carta in England, which granted freemen rights, a precursor to the United States Constitution. In his story of Parsifal, the 13th century knight Wolfram mentions three characters in particular. 1. The Fisher King Mazdan, whose name is derived from the name of the uncreated, almighty, all-powerful god of the Zarathustrians, Ahura Mazda. 2. Parsifal's father, Agamor, whose name is derived from the first mortal and the first mortal to die according to Zarathustrian tradition, Gaia Maritan. And 3. The astrologer Phlegetanus, who first conceived the Holy Grail and whose name in the Persian language means familiar with the stars, similar to how the ancient Greco-Romans called Zarathustra Zoroaster, believing his name to have meant star worshipper. From 1839 to 1919, the Aryans waged 3 successive wars against the British Empire called the Anglo-Afghan Wars. The kings of Afghanistan took on the same self-designated title Saladin had taken on during the Crusades, Defender of the Faith. By the end of each Anglo-Afghan war, the Afghans had won a decisive victory against the British Empire, and by the last war they had finally repelled the Redcoats. The 19th century German author Friedrich Nietzsche used Zarathustra as a model for his philosophy, which he describes in Thus Spoke Zarathushtra, because Zarathustra was the man who introduced God to the world. Because Nietzsche believed God was responsible for all the wars fought in the name of God, Nietzsche tells us God is dead, an attempt to undo all the atrocities that occur as a result of God. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche speaks of the Übermensch, who must accept that God is dead in order to rise to the status of Godhead. The concept of the Übermensch influenced Adolf Hitler's concept of the Aryan, or master race. This idea also gave rise to the comic book superhero Superman. The swastika is a Zarathustrian symbol. The Zarathustrians called this symbol the Gardune Khorshid, or Wheel of the Sun. Not only were the mosques in the Aryan zone built to look like Zarathustrian fire churches, but the Zarathustrian cross can be found on many of these sites. From 1977 to 1989, Aryans known as the Afghan Mujahideen waged what would be the most decisive war in history. The Afghans fought on the front line of the Cold War. They were up against the communist superpower, the USSR, which at the time was one of only two superpowers in the world, the other superpower being the United States. It was a war that would determine the fate of the Aryan religious heritage and how it was to be appropriated. If the Soviets had won the war, it could have meant the end of religion as we know it and the beginning of the governmental distribution of wealth. The Aryans put their self-designated title as the Defenders of the Faith to the test once again.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes, your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
By 1989, the last Soviet trooper had withdrawn from Afghan soil. The USSR was dissolved and the Berlin Wall was struck down. One by one, the Soviet republics began reverting back to capitalism, beginning with Lithuania in 1990. Thus, the world was now left with only one major superpower, the United States. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." Yet time and time again, the United States government has played a supportive role in the development of religious states. In 1947, the United States voted to establish the State of Israel. In 1964, the United States voted to include the Vatican as a permanent member state of the United Nations. Not to mention, every year the United States is responsible for contributing to Saudi Arabian oil wealth. None of the 9/11 hijackers were of either Aryan or Iraqi origin. Nor did the Iraqis have any ties to Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden did, however, have connections to both the Saudi Arabian royal family and the CIA. After the Cold War, Osama bin Laden stayed behind in Afghanistan and contributed to the nation's instability. Before 9/11, the Taliban had even agreed to hand bin Laden over to the Americans, but they refused to take him. The Taliban are not innocent of committing one human right atrocity after another, but the Taliban was a domestic movement. Bin Laden's terrorist network, on the other hand, was an extra-national movement. Here we see President Bush shaking hands with the leader of a tyrannical regime. Here we see President Obama shaking hands with the same tyrant. On top of this, in 2011, Julian Assange's WikiLeaks released classified documents showing how this tyrant and the United States had discussed attacking the Aryan nation known as Iran. The United States has no problem openly befriending these tyrannical regimes, but when it comes to dealing with the Aryan community, the United States tends to suppress the Aryans and the Aryan heritage in textbooks, in the press, in pop culture, and in politics. Take, for example, this following footage of Brian Williams' interview with the Iranian President Ahmadinejad. The Westerners consistently made claims that Ahmadinejad believed the Holocaust to be a myth.
It upset a lot of Jews in the United States and around the world when you called the Holocaust a myth.
Now, Ahmadinejad is no saint, but the same interview that is supposed to support this claim shows how the West had taken Ahmadinejad's statement completely out of context, because the same interview shows how Ahmadinejad acknowledges that there was a Holocaust.
چرا عده خاصی از اینها مهم شدن؟
Why is it that only a select group of those who were killed, that only a select group of those who were killed, that only a select group of those who were killed have become so prominent and important?
Yeah, I'm the Iranian. It's funny because people, I tell them, my American friends, I go, yeah, I'm Iranian. They go, oh, so you're Arab. And I'm like, no, we're actually different. We're not Arab. But, you know, I mean, we're similar. You know, we're all getting shot at. You know, that's one thing. But, you know, but Iranians are actually, ethnically, we're actually, you know, we're Aryan. We're white. We're white. So stop shooting.
The Irano-Afghans have only just begun to make themselves present in the West. The majority of them began arriving here en masse from 1977 onwards. It's no coincidence that the Irano-Afghans have been portrayed as a highly enlightened society by some Westerners, but tyrannical by other Westerners as far back as ancient Greek times, and that today Westerners continue to emphasize the bad apples instead of shedding light on the richness of the Irano-Afghan culture in textbooks, pop culture, and in politics. It'll take a fresh look and understanding at the Aryan community and the authentic or true Aryan cultural heritage, one that doesn't search for a nemesis to rally against and further ethnocentrisms, but instead one that searches for the good in all cultures, before Westerners and the Aryan community can put their differences behind them and work together to make the world a better place. The Aryan legacy lives on in expressions that can frequently be found in our words and in our hearts. Take the word God, for example, which can be found in every United States courthouse and on every dollar bill. More recently, the Aryan New Year Nowruz, which is believed to have been established by Zarathushtra himself, has even become an official festive day in New York. On this occasion, participants practice an ancient ritual rooted in the Aryan cultural heritage, fire jumping, to give thanks to their forefathers, to say goodbye to all one's bad memories, and to say hello to a new day and a fresh start.